Thank you for joining us for episode 468 of Live Happy Now. Mother's Day might be behind us, but for many moms and daughters, that holiday can be less about celebrating and more about surviving one another. I'm your host, Paula Phelps, and this week I'm joined by co-authors and mother-daughter duo, Leslie and Lindsey Glass, who have just released the book, The Mother-Daughter Relationship Makeover. They know all too well how fraught this relationship can be, and they're here to talk about what makes this relationship so difficult for some and how you can rebuild that relationship, find a positive pathway to peace, and finally restore the love between you. Let's have a listen. Leslie and Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me on Live Happy Now.
Oh, we're delighted to be here.
Yeah, good to meet you.
I want to start with the big question, and that is the one most of us have, and that is like, why is the mother-daughter relationship so challenging?
I'm going to start because
let the daughter start.
I think there are a lot of reasons, and I will certainly let Leslie jump in. One of the things that I think is the biggest factor is that often moms feel that daughters are reflective of them. So if daughter isn't dressing right, if she isn't acting right, if she's doing things that are embarrassing, that is a reflection that maybe mom didn't raise her right. I also think in a situation like ours, I look just like her. So, my mom was perfectly dressed at all times and coiffed, and that was not my style. She likes to call me a street rat, which is very kind. But, it was the 80s and the 90s. It was grunge, it was hip hop, so I did not follow her style. I did not follow her interests. She cooked, she knitted, she planted flowers. Now, the irony is I do now, but then I didn't. So that's what I think is a big trigger for moms. This child looks like me, but is nothing like me.
All right, I'm going to take us on a completely different track here.
I love this.
I think the conflict between mothers and daughters begins with the fact that mothers have control in the young years and they need to have control. So moms are the ones who tell you what to eat and when to go to bed and how to do everything. So, and I think that moms do this because it's their job to keep their children safe and it's their job to kind of raise their children well. I think what happens when daughters go to middle school and high school, that's where the independence, of course, starting at the age of 2, they want their own independence. But going into middle school, when girls have their own secrets, they have their own friends, they have extreme challenges, especially nowadays. Wanting to have moms not in their head, not telling them what to do, not telling them how to look. All of those things create conflicts that begin kind of in the teenage years, and they can get stuck there. But, Lindsey says it's about daughters being the reflection of moms, but I think moms want their daughters to be safe. I think they want them to be safe. I think they want them to behave well and achieve well. And, who wants to do that when you're a teenager?
Yeah, exactly. Well, how is it different than sons? Because I have friends, I don't have children, but I have friends, pretty much all my friends have children. And I see a big difference with those who have boys and those who have. And I have one friend, very good friend, and she's like, I would much rather have my 2 boys and put up with all the things that come with boys than navigate with girls. What's the difference?
I'm going to start. And I think that very often, you just give your sons a lot of slack. You think they're handsome, you think they're wonderful, you think they're doing well. But, we can't make generalizations about anything. I think I would say girls are prey animals. So we are very, very concerned about keeping our daughters safe. And I will say that over and over and over again. And your son is going to get into fights. He's going to tussle. He may start drinking early and do bad things, but you kind of let it go because you think they're tougher and they can handle it. And of course, some mothers in many cultures think their sons are perfect. No matter what.
Absolutely.
What would you say, Lindsey?
Yeah, I think it's just less emotionally charged with boys. And I've certainly seen dads who are really hard on their sons and let the girls get away with, everything. So I do think the wanting to protect the daughter and keep her safe and know everything has a lot to do with it. And yeah, I think boys just share less also. So you don't necessarily know. I mentor, and I was talking to one of my colleagues there, and I was like, "How are you doing?" And she goes, "I've got a teenage daughter." And I just
Like,
started
that's all you need to
laughing.
say.
And I said, "What's going on?" And she goes, "She's in her feelings." And no one needed to say anything else. Everyone in the room understood,
It's like a
a
moment of
13,
silence for
14-year-old,
mom.
yeah, in her feelings. So I think that's part of it. The girls will come home and sometimes they share, sometimes they don't, but oh, they cut me out of the friend group. I didn't get invited to the mall. So I think it opens the door for a lot more drama.
Right. Now, you all have an interesting relationship, and this book is a product of that. And first of all, I have to say, this book is so insightful, and it takes us through so many areas of conflict that makes us realize how universal this is. Just that recognition is incredibly helpful. But can you talk a little bit, tell our listeners a little about your relationship and how that led to writing this book?
I'll jump in on this one. So we went off track in my teen years and we got into the fighting habit. I call it the fighting habit. And we had different communication styles, we had different personality styles, and we just started clashing at a certain point and really struggled as the years went on. We were always close. And there were times we were very close, but we would just battle. And as the years went on, it becomes more and more toxic to have somebody in your life that you're battling and issues of control, issues of boundaries. So that kind of split us up. We both went off and did a lot of our own work and found our way back. So here are a few of the things we realized. Almost everybody's struggling with a few of these issues. 2, we're so busy pointing fingers at other people, we forget sometimes to step back, stop fighting, and look at ourselves. So there were so many universal things that we were experiencing that we were seeing happening with. So I'm in recovery. I sponsor young women. I'm sponsored, which means I work with younger, sober people. And we were hearing the same things. And nobody had tools. We were seeing tons of people who just were screaming at each other with no tools on how to stop. And we'd been writing for our website for 12 years on relationships and mental health and behavioral health. And we said, hey, we actually have a story to share and we have the tools to share. And because we're a family in recovery, we're very solution-based. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about the problem, but we want to move on to the solution. So let's take over.
You did that really well, Lindsey. I've been a good trainer as a mom. I think that
she talks about it like a horse trainer.
Exactly.
She's got a great gait. She can
look at that.
Like a pony
the right way.
I think that Lindsey hit the nail on the head. We've been writing about relationships for 12 years, and I've been a novelist for 30 years before that. So I'm a novelist. I was a journalist before that. And when Lindsey and I started working together, our whole purpose was to try and create the content, a body of content that would lift the stigma from addiction and explain what life in recovery looks like. And in order to do that, we had to kind of out ourselves. I mean, we had to say, you want to know what recovery looks like, or if you think recovery isn't working, we're in recovery. This is what recovery looks like. It looks like the two of us. So
not always, but sometimes.
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't always look like us because there are some families where part of the family's in recovery and part of the family isn't in recovery, and there are a lot of clashes over that. We had a mission, and I think that Lindsey and I have been writers, forever and ever and ever. So that is part of our solution. Part of our solution is creating the tools and being able to understand what's happening. So we've been writing about this family function, dysfunction, addiction, what is recovery for a lot of years. And we decided, because self-help books can be kind of descriptive in terms of telling you what to do, prescriptive, but without having the background of being able to say, well, how does change really happen? So the evolution was to take the knowledge that we had acquired over 12 years and put it in one book.
One thing I really liked about this is you have the journal prompts at the end. It is a very interactive book because it's not something that you just read and you're getting information thrown at you. You actually participate in it and decide how this affects you and what you need to do. I really love that about this book.
Not everybody likes to write, but there are ways that you can use the journal prompts. The idea is to start in the beginning by telling your story and getting some understanding about where you and your mother come from. What are your backgrounds? And the idea is to start, getting in the habit of kind of writing things down. And with the idea that in the beginning of the book, you think one way, and then you go through these 61 journal prompts. And at the end of the book, look at it and say, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I'm different now, or I can look at it and my perspective has changed.
That's super important. And I love that you brought up the fact that you dive into your background, because so many books, so many resources, they look at the immediate problem. Can you explain to us why it's so important for you to go back? Because you went way back, not just how your mother was raised. And I found it fascinating as you tied all these threads together and showed the way that your great-grandmother's upbringing influenced you. Can you talk about that? Why it's so important to dig back into that?
I will, because I think when we just look at our mother, we're just looking at this person who irritates us. And, no matter how great your relationship is, this person who raised you is going to be irritating or in some way or another. But how did she get the way she is? And how did I get the way I am? So as we started to write our own stories, I wanted everybody to go back and be able to see, well, my mother was an immigrant, or my grandmother was an immigrant, or she was Greek, or she was Irish, or she was Swedish. How does that culture inform our behavior? Because a lot of our behavior, a lot of our beliefs come from our culture and our religion. And how do those different components make our mother act the way she did, our grandmother act the way she did, and now I'm acting the way I am, because the way I act are things that were taught to me by my grandmother who lived 100 years ago and my great-grandmother who raised her. So when you understand the components and the history of the women in your family and what they've been through, maybe the traumas that they've been through, you have more perspective and you have more compassion for, the way you were raised. And all of us have toxic aspects to our relationships.
I think that's really, really good. And I think one of the things I just wanted to expand on for a second was it's that compassion and that point of view.
Yeah.
I was so angry at my mom about certain behaviors and certain things. And now I'm an adult, I'm in my 40s, and I'm writing a book, and I'm reading about how she had nobody to help her when she had young children. Her mother died when she was young. People were trying to get her not to work. All she wanted to do was work, and they didn't want to let her work. There were just so many things and traumas that happened in her own life that I didn't know. As a teenager, so angry, like, what's wrong with you? And then as an adult, you're like, oh my gosh, she was dealing with mental health stuff, whatever the situation was. She was in a tumultuous marriage. She had no female support in her life. We didn't live in a world where we could talk about how we were feeling. This is a relatively new thing. So learning that mental health history is also really important. So you're not sitting here going, why do I feel crazy? Well, maybe there are reasons.
The holiday season is here, which means it's time for spreading happiness and bringing smiles to the people who mean the most to you. If you're looking for the perfect stocking stuffers to spark joy this season, the Live Happy gift store has you covered. Right now, our sales section is bursting with cheerful finds, like our best-selling mop top pens that always bring a smile, plus a variety of themed sticky notes to brighten any desk, locker, or daily planner. And even better, right now, these little treasures are being offered at up to 50% off. Whether you're shopping for coworkers, friends, or family, these playful picks make holiday gifting easy and fun. So don't wait. Visit the Live Happy gift store at store.livehappy.com and head straight to the sales section to grab stocking stuffers that spread happiness without breaking the bank. That's store.livehappy.com, where you can live happy and gift happy. We'll be right back with Leslie and Lindsey Glass, but I wanted to take a moment to talk about how you can make your day more comfortable and more stylish with help from Franny Goldie. This line of clothing was created by a Grammy-winning musician who knows the importance of looking good on the road, but she didn't want to sacrifice comfort. So she created a line of wrinkle-free essentials to build a wardrobe that feels as good as it looks. And right now, Franny Goldie is providing Live Happy Now listeners 20% off their first order of $75 or more. You can go to frannygoldie.com/podcast and use the code HAPPY for 20% off. That's FRANNEGOLDE.com/podcast for 20% off your order of $75 or more with the code HAPPY. And now, let's get back to my talk with Leslie and Lindsey to learn more about how to repair a fractured mother-daughter relationship. And as you came to grips with everything, your relationship, all the dynamics of it, how did you outline how to put that into this book? Because it's very thoughtfully arranged and it takes us through this, as you said, these steps. At the end, you're like, I'm a changed person. So how did you come up with this outline?
What most people don't know is we actually wrote a different version of this book 14 years ago. We were glad that version never made it because we had so much more to go through. And it was a much darker story. And it didn't have the self-help stuff because that's something our business has grown into. So we had a lot of the story that we wanted to tell about ourselves already in our heads. And then as far as how we actually outline the steps, we really wanted to take the reader on kind of a transformative experience so that when they started, they were over here thinking, oh, she's the problem. This is what's happened in my life. And we followed almost a 12-step formula, which is we want you to get some understanding about who you are and what's happened. Then we want you to understand what the issues are. So we chose the 8 biggest issues that mothers and daughters fight about for part 2. Then for part 3 and part 4, that's pretty much all self-help. Part 3, obviously, if you're in this situation, you need healing and forgiveness. So we spent 4 years doing that. We're going to talk about all the things we did. And then the end is some people are not going to be able to reconcile. If there's addiction or serious mental health issues or somebody is unsafe, these situations happen. And we wanted to create a section for what to do if you can't reconcile. And because we love recovery, changed our lives, we did a whole recovery lifestyle piece. Because any family that's been through dysfunction, like everybody's recovering from something. Right. Has a family member been sick? Has there been suicide in the family? Did somebody lose a job and it created financial instability? Like all of these things you can find recovery from. So that's the sort of model we followed. And we got a lot of good advice along the way.
I think it's funny because our contract says that we need to write kind of a self-help book in 165 pages, right? And when Lindsey and I started getting into it, we knew that the issues that mother and daughters fight about, the 8 issues that we chose, was almost the book contract.
Length of the book, yeah.
Yes, the length of the book. You can't just start with triggers and traumas. You can't start a book with, what are your triggers? Because you have to first understand who you are. You know, what is it about my daughter that's making me angry? And does it come from me or does it come from my mother? Right. We really felt that you need to have a background for everything that you're talking about. You can't just, Lindsey, you said it perfectly. So many self-help books that we read, they're taking the problem. You're fighting. You may be addicted to fighting because it's bringing those bad hormones front and center.
And we used our own story for there always to be a little bit of background. So here's what happened to us. Now you can figure out what happened to you.
Yeah. See, and I like that because kind of like sitting down with a therapist where you're not just having to say, okay, here's what's going on, or it's like you soften us up a bit by sharing. You're so vulnerable and open with us about your story, which makes me as a reader more willing to be open. So I think that's very well done with this.
It's just interesting, you know, when you start to actually talk about these kind of, I don't want to call them shameful, but issues that nobody likes to admit. You know, people don't like to admit that there are problems in the family or that somebody's lying or that somebody has an addiction. And I'm sure you know as well as I do, addictions don't have to be just to drugs and alcohol.
Right. I would love for our listeners to hear about some of the universal conflicts because you do break it down where someone might be reading it thinking, I thought it was just me and my mom that went through it about this topic. So let's talk about what are the major areas of conflict between mothers and daughters.
I'm going to start with food, because I think food is a big one in this country right now. And we do talk a lot about food. I was overfed as a child. That meant that, people were pushing a lot of food into me all of the time when I wasn't hungry, but I wasn't allowed to have snacks. Now, all day, every day in America, people are feeding their children snacks all day long. And then they're worried about whether they're too heavy or they're not too heavy. The whole idea of what the food industry has done to us in terms of, not eating meals anymore. We used to eat meals. We used to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but now it's like snack time all day long.
Mhm.
So I think
Graze. We don't eat, we graze.
it's very difficult to be thin in a family where people are big. And I think it's very difficult to be big in a family where the people are thin. So I think there's a lot of conflict around food and culture, and confusing food with love and all of that. So I would say food is a big one.
So the ones, I'll list them out and then I'll tell you the ones that we struggled with. So we did boyfriends, girlfriends, romantic partners. I mean, come on, that endless possibilities. Does mom not like the boyfriend, the girlfriend? Are there sexuality questions that family members don't understand? So romantic partners was a huge one. That wasn't an issue for us, actually. She was very, very accepting of my friends and partners. So we didn't actually have that one. We had money. Money was one of our biggest trigger issues because my mom was successful. She spoiled me. And I grew up thinking that what she had, I had. And we had to do some real boundary work. We can talk about money in a second. So there was food, independence, and codependence. So those issues of mom wanting to know where you are, what you're doing, are you calling me, what's your curfew, and daughters wanting to be more independent. Or for every one of these situations, there's the opposite. There's the good girl with a party girl mom. Why aren't I being picked up on school? Like, why am I the only one left over at the sleepover whose mom hasn't picked her up? My mom would forget me and bring me places on the wrong day. And guess what? So did her mom. Did the same thing. Our full taffeta dress,
Oh, no.
party gift in my hand, knocking on the door. Leslie, today is not the birthday party. Take her home.
It's next week.
No.
So
I have trouble with numbers.
That's because you're a journalist.
Yeah.
And I inherited that. So appearance and style, that's another big one. So I was a club kid and a grunge kid, and that was infuriating to my mother. Boundaries and detachment. And then the last two, and this isn't for every family, but when these are involved, they're a huge deal. Drugs and alcohol and mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
So those to us, and from a little bit of research, seem to be the biggest global issues that mothers and daughters fight about. And for us, obviously, drugs and alcohol, independence, and codependence, those were our big ones.
Right now, mental health is such a huge concern. We just did something, the World Happiness Report, and it showed how Gen Z in particular is suffering. Their mental health is very, very poor. And then the millennials aren't doing great either. Gen X is a little better, and then the boomers are fine. And so what then, as parents, if you're a mother and you have a daughter who is part of Gen Z, who is going through this mental distress that's happening globally, really, what are some of the ways that they can navigate that?
So when I talk to parents, one of the things we want to have them do is really pay attention. Don't look the other way. It's not a phase. It's usually not a phase. Or the boys will be boys. That's not acceptable. These are not acceptable things anymore. So we have to really look at the behavior and ask questions. And not always, here's the thing, no one wants to believe their child lies, no one, but some do. Right. And it's very hard when you talk to parents because they say, my child would never lie to me. And then I get in the room with the kids and I'm like, how many of you are actually telling your parents everything that's going on in your lives? And not one hand goes up.
Right.
So they have to check. My mom talked, she goes, I never called any other parents. I believed her. I was never where I said I was. Had she called once she would have known I was never where I said I was. I mean, I might have gone to that person's house at the end of the night, but we certainly weren't sitting home baking Toll House cookies and watching movies.
That
As
is
you said you
not
were.
what was going on.
So that's what I kind of say to parents, take it really seriously and always feel good and okay about getting outside help. Kids don't want to talk to their parents. They're going to talk to somebody else. And when you ask kids why they don't want to talk to their parents, they don't want to disappoint them. They don't want to worry them. They don't want to start a fight. So kids aren't being bad. They're just, I didn't want to say to my mom, I think I'm a drug addict at 15. Right. So Mom, do you want to add stuff?
I do, because you write a lot about despair. And I think what happens in middle school and high school, kids experience trauma, a lot more trauma than in earlier generations. And I think a lot of the trauma happens then. It happens because of drinking. It happens because of bullying. It happens for a myriad of reasons. But kids are threefold concern is, how am I achieving? How do I look? And how do I behave? That's how parents and their teachers are looking at them. And they're being judged by their looks, their behavior, and their achievement. And basically what makes us good human beings and what makes us happy human beings later in life have nothing to do with how we look, how we achieve, and how we behave. It's what's happening inside. And the one thing that parents are not talking about, except your friend who you were mentoring the other day said inner feelings, but basically parents are not really connected with their children's inner feelings, and they don't have the tools for children and young adults to be able to talk to them in a way that inspires them and helps them move past whatever destructive feelings or conditioning they're getting elsewhere. We just aren't helping our teens and our young adults. They don't have that drive and ambition. A lot of them don't have it. So it may be because marijuana is more prevalent and it makes you not care a lot. But I think that we're missing a step in development, and that's emotional development. And because we're not working on that piece of human development, our young people are feeling empty, lost. They don't know what their place is in society, and they're scared.
Let's be honest. There were no shootings in schools when I was growing up. Right. There was no climate catastrophe. We were way, way more protected in the world in the early 90s than we are now.
I think every student, every young person, whether it's a high school student or a college student, knows somebody who's died, or maybe a number of people who have died. Their siblings are maybe using drugs. They may be incredibly frightened. We're concerned about mental health, but are we using tools? Are we using the kind of tools that we need to stay connected emotionally with our children? Mental health is not jumping off the roof. It's finding ways to live happy, live well, and be happy.
It is. And, when children are born, you hear parents say, I don't care. I just want them to be happy and healthy. And then by the time they're 3 years old, they're like, I want them to get into this school. And I want them to do this. And I want them to be a doctor or a lawyer. And it's interesting to see how every parent wants their child to be happy, but we're not really equipping them with the tools and skills to achieve happiness. We teach them how to be successful, but we don't teach them how to be happy.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
One thing that struck me as I was reading your book is how this is about changing the relationship between the current mother and daughter. How, in doing that, is that going to change subsequent generations? Because that's what strikes me is like, this is a book that doesn't just change the mother-daughter. You can affect generations by making these changes. Have you talked about that?
Absolutely. It's like breaking the cycles, breaking all destructive cycles, whether it's a fighting habit, whether it's being judgmental about everything the other one does, whether it's that fight or flight kind of slamming doors, or that being silent and being cold to each other. The whole idea is to find compassion for the other person and have the tools, have the actual ways to stop your fighting. We talk about triggers and how to stop your triggers. But I think that once you create new habits and new cultural habits with your mother and daughter, your grandchildren are going to repeat it, your sons, and it will also work with all your other relationships.
About that. Go ahead and answer. I was going to ask about that too.
Well, I'm going to lead right into that question because often when one person changes, people follow. So if one person gets sober, sometimes other people get sober. If one person in the family says, hey, I'm not going to fight anymore. You want to talk to me, here's how you have to talk to me. And it sticks, then you're going to be moving forward. And I think the whole thing about stopping the generational stuff is clarity. Because people are walking around not even understanding that they're behaving in ways. I have heard so many women tell me how crazy their mother is. And then I'm looking at their lives and their behavior and their relationships. And I'm like, apple doesn't fall far from the tree, honey. So, in our family, we said, hey, we've got X, Y, and Z going on, and we don't want this going on to the next generation. So here are the things we're willing to do. And here's the problem with outing yourself. Once everybody knows, you have to be accountable.
Right.
So there's a certain amount of accountability that we're forced into just by, I'm like, now I can't scream at people in the car because somebody recognizes me. She's not so recovered.
As I said, this is an incredible book. It has so much advice and so much insight to give. What is it that you hope to see come out of it?
My big thing was hope, because when we were in that bad place, it felt hopeless. And it wasn't until I went into certain kinds of groups that I even knew other people were dealing with it. So my hope is that it shares with a lot of people that a lot of us are going through this and that you're not alone. If you struggle with your mom or daughter, you are just not alone. And there are some solutions. What about you?
I just want people to understand more about the female experience. I want people to be able to look and say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that about women. I didn't know that about women. I didn't know. And it was, looking back 100 years of the way my great grandmother probably didn't know how to read. She raised 9 children and they all went on to be, successful people. And I just want people to understand how much trauma and how difficult it is to be a woman, how great we are. The Chinese say that we hold up half of the heaven, but, we probably hold up the whole heaven because there wouldn't be any humanity without us. I want mothers and daughters to have more compassion for who we are and what we've accomplished in the world, what we have to go through.
Lindsey, Leslie, fabulous spending time with you today. I know our listeners are going to love this. We're going to tell them how they can find you, how they can find your book, and how they can start healing their own mother-daughter relationship. So
awesome.
Thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
That was Leslie and Lindsey Glass, authors of The Mother-Daughter Relationship Makeover. If you'd like to learn more about them, discover their book, or follow them on social media, just visit us at livehappy.com and click on the podcast tab. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Live Happy Now, and if you aren't already receiving us every week, we invite you to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, feel free to drop us a review and let us know what you think of the show. That is all we have time for today. We'll meet you back here again next week for an all-new episode. And until then, this is Paula Phelps reminding you to make every day a happy one.